I'm on a mission like a couple spies, and that, guys, is the reason why I catechize the good.
Welcome to the Reformed Standard. I'm Tony. Let's get started. Question 19 of the Westminster Larger Catechism reads, what is God's providence towards the angels? Answer, God by his providence permitted some of the angels, willfully and irrecoverably, to fall into sin and damnation, limiting and ordering that and all of their sins to his own glory, and to establish the rest in holiness and happiness, employing them all at his pleasure in the administrations of his power, mercy, and justice. So this question is getting at one of the kind of what you might call one of the most significant mysteries of the scriptures, is how could it be that angels, beings that are created in holiness, knowledge, mighty in power, are created according to God's design and intention? How could it be that Satan chiefly and the angels that followed after him, how could it be that they rebelled against God whom they had knowledge of? And this answers that question basically by saying that God providentially permitted some of these angels to fall into sin and into damnation. But this fall, this sin, was not something that happened outside of God's decree or outside of God's ordering. And instead, this fall is limited and ordered that all of their sins might redound to the glory of God. So even in the fall, the angelic sin and fall, God is still ordering all things to his own glory and to his own honor. And I think that it's important to recognize that this is kind of a follow-up question from question 13, which had to do with the decrees concerning the angels and men. And so just as the Catechism sort of focuses on the decrees concerning angels as men in sort of a particular way, obviously, as we said, all things happen according to God's decree. So in one sense, the decree is no more focused on angels and men than on anything else. But in a particular sense, God has set his attention on these two types of creatures. And in that one, we see that his decree is focused. So also here, the discussion of providence is focused. But what we see here, and this is a common feature of Reformed theology, is that what happens in time that God providentially permits or causes, we'll talk about the difference between permission and causing probably at a later point, but whatever God ordains, whatever God decrees in eternity past, occurs in creation according to his providence. So it's not as though God, as we've said, it's not as though God winds up the clock and designs the clock and then pushes play and then sits back and watches it. But instead, God is active in creation behind everything that happens. So God is the first cause, to use sort of Aristotle and Aquinas' language. God is the first cause of all things. He's the primary cause of all things. And then most things, not all things, but most things unfold according to secondary causes, which generally speaking are natural, providential causes. So although God is the first cause of the angelic fall, the second cause would be their willful fall into sin, right? The Catechism here says that they fell willfully. So it's not as though they were created and simply as a byproduct of their nature without any sort of willful or voluntary act on their own part fell into sin. But God's providence permitted them to engage their own wills, which were free, to fall into sin. And then he establishes the rest in holiness and happiness. So one of the things that sometimes is asked is there a plan of salvation for Satan and for the other angels? And the answer is no, that God has decreed and God has providentially brought it about that those angels who fall and sin have no plan of redemption. They have no means of redemption. But then the other side of the question is sometimes asked, well, could the angels who have not fallen, could they fall at some point in the future? And the answer here is, again, no. He's established them, the remaining angels who didn't fall, in holiness and happiness. And so what we see here is kind of a sort of a sneak peek, or sort of a glimpse of what might have happened had Adam fulfilled his condition of personal, perfect, and perpetual obedience, which we'll get into tomorrow or on Thursday or whenever the next episode airs. He established them such that they were subject to fall. They were subject to change. We saw that in question 16. But now that they have, those who have fallen, and those who did not have not, he has established the rest, and at least in this particular area, they are no longer mutable, which is important because that's our hope of glory. At least part of it is that once we've been confirmed in glory on the last day, we no longer have the ability to fall. We no longer have a will that can choose to do evil. And so we can see here that God, in his providence, did allow some angels to fall, but those that passed what you might call the angelic probation or the angelic test, sort of the equivalent to Adam's test in the garden. Now, we don't have any record of a covenant, so it's not exactly the same thing, but those who did persist in holiness and were obedient to the Lord, he is now confirmed in holiness, so they no longer can fall. And then this last clause here, it says he is employing them all at his pleasure in the administrations of his power, mercy, and justice. Now, you can take this one of two ways. You can take this as applying only to those who did not fall. But I think a more biblical way to understand this, and I think probably what the divines had in mind here, I'd have to look at the proof text, which I don't have in front of me, but even the angels who've fallen, even the angels who fell into sin, are still employed by God at his pleasure to administer his power, mercy, and justice. So in a certain sense, we see this in the book of Job, that Satan comes into the throne room of God. He comes in and he accuses Job. And God uses those sinful accusations. He uses the evil intent in Satan's world or in his mind. And he uses that to administer his power, his mercy, and justice. And that's a little bit of a difficult thing for us to think about. But this is something that we see throughout Scripture. We see that the demons, they operate according to God's commands. So we see the demons that are interacting with Christ during his time on earth. They're obedient to his command, and ultimately their rebellion still serves to bring about the glory of God and to serve in the administration of his power and his mercy and his justice.
Do you know, if you want, you could know this? The Catechism, hey, the Catechism, hey. Do you know what the chief and the man is? And how the Father, Son, and Spirit do manage? Do you know, if you want, you could know?
West Side.